Wanted to share a few initial thoughts, takeaways from the World Water Tech Summit that was just hosted here in London. It's wrapping up this afternoon. Hello, this is Andrew Swirsky with InfraSync Technology Services, where we help utilities design, deploy, operate smart utility systems. A few interesting observations about the European and the UK state of affairs when it comes to utilities and technologies. There's a few things that are further along in the progression. Much denser urban networks from denser populations, so that's enabled them to do more Internet of Things and denser concentrations, such as acoustic leak sensing, non-revenue water, leak detection. More of their infrastructure is in entire geographic or urban areas, compared to the US, where you have much more suburban sprawl, which doesn't seem like it's slowing down anytime soon. Another factor is the aging infrastructure. Quite a bit was rebuilt after World War II, but quite a bit of the infrastructure was even in place before that. So while a lot of the infrastructure in the United States was very federally subsidized, built up through the 60s, 70s, early 80s, it's a good generation or two younger than the utilities by and large in Europe. Pipeline replacement programs are even more essential in the UK and other areas. Still important in the US, but maybe not quite as much. It was also very interesting to see the deployment of AMI, advanced metering technology, in the United States is very mature, accelerating. Every large city I'm aware of in the US already has advanced metering infrastructure in place that does remote reads, and a lot of them are looking to improve and expand those capabilities. There's quite a few utilities, the UK and the EU, that are still in that transition, either from unmetered to metered connections or to remote reads, and the benefits of remote read technology for water distribution and consumption. So that was very interesting. The US seems to have leapfrogged technologically that area quite a bit. One other thing to note is the differences with consolidation. So you have much larger utilities that are serving the municipalities. So you usually have one regional provider or utility that serves dozens or hundreds of cities. And so what that does is allows for slightly easier data aggregation, because it is one utility that's bringing all that together, compared to the US, where in every major urban metro area you have dozens, if not even more, utilities, not overlapping, but all right next to each other, and more of a patchwork system around these cities. What that leads to is the need for much greater data sharing in the community across the different utilities. A good example of that is the Cleveland Water Alliance. Brian was here discussing about how they've been able to deploy sensors and software that benefits all of the utilities and industry in the area, that has participation from multiple utilities. So I'd expect to see that model accelerate a little bit faster in the US, where you have neighboring and adjacent utilities, perhaps someone that does the surface water versus the drinking water versus the wastewater, consolidate their data a little bit more voluntarily through funded programs. I think we will also see the PFA destruction technology greatly accelerate in the US due to incoming regulations, and that technology will also see lots of benefits across the UK and the European markets. Quite a few different challenges in the US versus the European side. Most of the technology works pretty well in both markets, but it comes down to the specific utility infrastructure. So for example, I already mentioned there's a lot more denser urban population in the UK, so denser sensor networks tend to make a little bit more sense, whereas in the US you have more suburban areas. And actually the latest studies I was seeing actually show net movement out of heavy urban cores into more suburbs in the US. So you're still having that continued suburban sprawl in the US, which means that sensor networks may not be as cost effective. But the upside to that is if it's a newer suburb system, then they have newer infrastructure, which hopefully should last for 20, 30, 40 years before it needs significant replacement and overhaul. Saw lots of great innovations for PFA sequestration and destruction, and some very interesting technology for removing phosphorus from natural water body streams, either through electronic methods, which was very interesting, or through more chemical or pellet-based methods that are absorbing it out and can be reapplied as fertilizer with all that phosphorus or nitrogen they've absorbed without having to take the PFAS up into it. I didn't see anything too revolutionary for non-revenue water systems, so still on the hunt for a few more technologies there. The maturity and the deployments and the size of the sensor networks in the UK was quite a bit more. Years ago, you saw many equipment manufacturers, software distributors go out and talk about data in to make sure that their platforms could adjust more and more types of data. And actually at this year's summit, saw quite a few more companies talking about not only the data in, but the data out. That yes, we can take the data in from multiple data sources and platforms and then share that with others. So you're not having to make as binary of a choice between different software platforms and vendors. You may be able to use multiple in conjunction to do the best fit for your utility or your system. One of the blessings and curses of the US infrastructure market is that a lot of our bias is to build bigger treatment plants, piping networks, etc., to support the population growth, particularly in the South, where I do quite a bit of business. So for example, Texas, Florida, healthy economies, very, very strong tax base that allows to build out new capacity, expand treatment. Very different than the European economic growth, population growth. They are trying to very much make do with what they have and rehabilitate their older infrastructure investments and making sure that they're spending their money on efficiencies instead of necessarily just capacity expansion, which is the default in most of the US utilities.